the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
Okay, so you're here with us again on the deep dive because you really want to get into some of this kind of complex stuff, but quickly and thoroughly, right?
Right.
We don't want to mess around.
Yeah.
So we're going to be diving into a recent opinion piece from the New York Post, and it really focuses on some friction that's going on between President Trump's administration and the judicial branch.
Right.
Specifically, this column argues that some judges are really kind of stepping out of bounds here and potentially setting what the author calls an impeachment trap for the president.
Okay.
And so we have this column as kind of our main source today.
Yeah.
And our goal is to kind of understand this perspective and what they're saying is happening between the White House and the courts.
Okay, so the main thing the New York Post columnist argues is that there's like a corrupt cartel, and I'm using his words there, made up of Democratic law firms, judges, NGOs, and what he calls deep state bureaucrats.
Right.
And they're using legal challenges or lawfare to go against the Trump administration.
Yeah. What do you think about that just right off the bat? I mean, that's a pretty big accusation.
Well, it is a really big accusation, and it makes you wonder, what's the evidence for something like that? Are we going to see evidence presented?
Exactly. And the first thing that he kind of jumps into is talking about a ruling by Judge James Boasberg.
Okay.
And Judge Boasberg ruled that President Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 was illegal.
Oh, okay.
And the Alien Enemies Act is basically this act about deporting foreign individuals if they're deemed dangerous.
Okay.
And so this was specifically looking at how the administration wanted to deport certain individuals that they considered to be threats.
Right.
And they were using the Alien Enemies Act to speed up that deportation process.
Gotcha.
And the example they were using was members of this Venezuelan gang called Tren de Aragua.
Tren de Aragua.
Yeah. And President Trump had actually described them and their activities as an invasion or predatory incursion and even irregular warfare.
Wow.
Orchestrated by the Maduro regime in Venezuela.
Oh, wow.
And as a result of this, 2 plane loads of these individuals were deported to El Salvador.
Wow.
And we were paying El Salvador $6 million to detain these individuals for a year.
Wow.
So this is, really kind of putting executive power into practice and money behind it.
Definitely.
And the columnist is arguing and echoing kind of people like Bondi, saying that Judge Boasberg is an unelected federal judge who is really trying to dictate foreign policy.
Interesting.
What do you think about that kind of framing?
What's interesting, I mean, on the one hand, you could say that he is stepping into that foreign policy realm.
Right.
But on the other hand, you could also say, well, he's a judge and he's upholding the law.
Right, exactly.
And so there is that tension there.
Right. And then he takes it even a step further. And he's saying that Judge Boasberg is demanding like minute details of the flights from DOJ lawyers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's not just like, was this legal or illegal?
Right.
But he's wanting to know like all this information.
Okay.
And according to the columnist, it's almost like he's trying to lay the groundwork for either a contempt charge.
Wow.
Or even potentially an impeachment of President Trump.
Really?
Yeah.
So, he's really painting this picture that Judge Boasberg is out to get Trump.
Yeah. And so the columnist is saying like, this is a politically motivated decision and this is kind of how they're getting in the way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop there.
Okay.
He goes on to talk about a couple other instances.
Right.
And he uses those as examples of what he's calling this like judicial coup.
A judicial coup.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the examples is Judge Theodore Chuang.
Okay.
Who was an Obama appointee.
Okay.
And Judge Chuang blocked the dismantling of USAID, which the columnist describes as a slush fund for shady Democratic projects. And he also halted a freeze on $2 billion in outgoing funds.
Interesting.
What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, that's very loaded language. slush fund and shady Democratic projects.
Right.
But, it is a lot of money.
Right.
And you can see how, if you're coming from a certain perspective, you might see that as,
Right.
Being wasteful or partisan.
Exactly.
But then on the other hand, you could also say, well, USHIs have been around for a long time.
Right.
And it has a mission.
Right.
And maybe Judge Strong is just trying to uphold that.
Right. And upholding the law as he sees it.
Exactly.
Okay. And then he also points to a case with Judge Anna Reyes.
Okay.
Who is a Biden appointee.
Okay.
And Judge Reyes blocked President Trump's executive order that banned transgender individuals from serving in the military.
Okay.
And the columnist is very upset about this.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Saying that, a district judge should not have this much power. And he kind of takes it to the extreme, saying, well, what's next? Do we have to get judicial approval for airstrikes?
Yeah, like where does it end?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what do you think is at the core of this argument?
I think it's this idea of, the separation of powers.
Right.
And how much power does each branch have?
Exactly.
He's basically saying the executive branch should have more power.
Right.
Especially when it comes to the military.
Right.
But then, there's also this argument that the judiciary has a role to play
exactly
in terms of protecting people's rights.
Right.
And so, if there's an executive order that seems to violate people's rights, then maybe the judiciary does need to step in.
Right. And so it's really that question of where's the line, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So when we kind of take all these examples together, Judge Boasberg, Judge Trump, Judge Reyes, what is he trying to say overall?
He's trying to say that this is a pattern.
Right.
This isn't just a few isolated incidents.
Right.
He's calling it a judicial coup. He's calling it a black-robed judicial insurrection.
Wow.
And he's basically saying that these judges are defying the will of the people.
Wow.
They're going against the Trump agenda.
Okay.
And he says that the reason why they're doing this is because the Democrats in Congress are too divided and incompetent to do it themselves.
Oh, so he's really saying that this is like a partisan effort.
Yeah, he's definitely implying that.
Okay. And then towards the end, he says something interesting. He says that President Trump is now prepared for these legal challenges in a way that he wasn't during his first presidency.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's interesting because it suggests that he's learned from his past experiences.
Right.
And he's maybe, put in place some safeguards or something to protect himself.
Right. So he's saying that, Trump is going to fight back, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then he ends on a very strong note.
Okay.
He says that we need to smash the courts.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
Yeah. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's obviously very strong language.
Right.
And, it reflects a deep level of frustration with the judiciary.
Right.
And I think it really highlights the tension that we're seeing between these different branches of government.
Okay, so to sum this all up for the listener, this New York Post column is basically arguing that President Trump's agenda is being intentionally sabotaged by people in the judiciary and related entities through legal challenges that they're bringing.
Exactly.
And he's using specific rulings as evidence.
Yeah.
Like the one involving the Alien Enemies Act.
Right.
The actions against USAID. And the overturning of the transgender military ban as evidence that these judges are going too far.
Yeah.
And maybe even trying to lay a trap to get him impeached.
Right. He's saying that they're not just, making rulings based on the law. Right. He's saying that they're politically motivated.
Exactly. And that there's a bigger effort here.
Exactly.
And he calls that a judicial coup, where unelected judges are getting in the way of the executive branch and going against what he's saying is the will of the people.
Right. And I think, this really gets at this question of what is the role of the judiciary?
Exactly.
Are they there to just interpret the law?
Right.
Or are they there to also protect people's rights?
Right.
Even if that means going against the other branches of government.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting to hear this perspective.
Definitely.
And, this columnist has a very strong opinion.
He does.
And he's not afraid to kind of share it.
Yeah.
But it makes you think about these bigger questions.
Absolutely.
Of how these branches are supposed to interact.
Yeah.
And what are the limits of their powers.
Right.
So yeah, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
And I hope for the listener, this kind of sheds some light on this perspective.
Yeah. And it really makes you think, you know, where do you draw the line?
Right.
Between, what's legitimate judicial oversight and what's maybe, political maneuvering.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think that's something that, everyone listening can kind of ponder.
Absolutely.
As we continue to see how this plays out.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
In the heart of this nation, under skies so blue, there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family.